National Consultation on the status of women, of which women in media is a subcomponent, if I understand the drift of the session appropriately. Dr. Pam Rajput and go a fairly long way back in life. She was a colleague of my late father at the Punjab University, Chandigarh, friends with my mother, and of course has been a witness to the very rowdy upbringing which I have had. But be that as it may, when she invited me to be a part of this session, obviously, for reasons of propriety, I could not say no, but more importantly, I think it is very important that we try and acquaint ourselves firsthand with what really has been or what really are the issues which have been agitating the minds of women journalists, people who are in the public space, and what steps do they think are appropriate or required to be able to surmount some of the specific issues which need to be addressed. I thank Dr. Rajput for having led me through the entire drift of the discussion, and as she said that what she articulated was fresh from the oven, I'm sure that we also would not only take it with the seriousness it deserves, but try and see that whatever is possible in the interim while you finalize your recommendations, we could possibly act upon. Before I launch into my limited understanding of the media space as I see it, I would like to request this august house that if you have between 3 or 5 recommendations which you think are doable in the short term, and since issues pertaining to women, I don't think will get constrained by the model code of conduct kicking in. So therefore, even if we give ourselves the next 60 or 75 days, let me see as to out of those 5, how many are we able to implement. So if we can have a set of 3 to 5 recommendations, which you think are doable given the time constraint, we would definitely like to see as to how we can address them. With regard to the last issue that you flagged, the Women's Reservation Bill, as you're aware, it's been passed in the Rajya Sabha. We've been trying to build a consensus on it in the Lok Sabha. Yes, there is resistance, which all of you are aware of. But as I understand from the discussions which we've had in the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, that government is committed to putting it on to the table of the Lok Sabha in this very last session of the 15th Lok Sabha. So therefore, that is insofar as the women's reservation is concerned. About women in media, well, a large number of practitioners in this room possibly understand the media space much better than I do. But if we were to segment it, if we were to look at media in terms of 3 verticals, the print, the electronic, and the new media, I think each of them has its own very peculiar and unique characteristics. And then we could possibly try and see if we can superimpose a common narrative in terms of action points which run through all 3 of them, which can really help to address some of the issues which have been raised. The advantage with print media is that you have the time for reflection between what you assimilate and ultimately what is reported. And I think that time of reflection gives everybody a chance to possibly insert an element of sensitivity where an element of sensitivity is required. And so therefore you would find that reportage in the print media with regard to sensitive issues is at times far more nuanced, far more balanced, and far more sensitive, to say the least. The difficulty with the print, with the electronic media, is of a different nature altogether. I have articulated this earlier, and I have no hesitation in saying it, though it's my personal view, that possibly the liberalization of the electronic media space and the manner in which it has happened is possibly one of the most corrosive legacies of economic liberalization. And the reason why I say that, and I say that with a full sense of responsibility, is because what I could understand as a lawyer when I came to this job was that possibly this was the only sector where a legal or a regulatory framework had succeeded the opening up of the sector rather than preceded it. So therefore, what you have in the electronic media space, and since for 5 years I had the opportunity of interacting with the front end of the media, and over the last 1.5 years, an opportunity to look at the back end of the media, and I can say that the first interaction was absolutely a pleasure, and that's not to say that the second is a nightmare, but be that as it may. The fact is that you have close to 798 television channels as we speak. Out of those 798 television channels, there are 415 news and current affairs channels. And news and current affairs occupies only 7% of the media space, which is made up of about 15.5 crore households, television households, at the last count. The entire revenue model of the electronic media is completely driven by advertising. The entire effort at digitization was an attempt also to correct this skew in order to bring about a situation whereby subscriber revenues also start kicking in. But that's a process which is taking time. We've gone through phase 1, we've gone through phase 2, but as we go into phase 3 and phase 4, there are certain lessons to be learned of phase 1 and phase 2, which we are trying to incorporate in phase 3 and phase 4. So therefore, as we speak, it is the entire television industry remains dependent for its revenue model on advertising revenues. And advertising revenues are measured, with all due respects, because the matter is sub judice and is under adjudication as we speak, by a very flawed instrument or by a very flawed currency called the television rating points. And the unfortunate specter of television rating points is that it's a monopoly market. And a monopoly market which unfortunately is not representative of the demographic reality of India. You have 11,805 people meters, which of course is also subject to being verified, which measure the audience preferences of about 70 crore people across this country. And that TRP benchmark really drives the entire advertising revenue towards A particular channel or B particular channel. And therefore, you have this mad race of sensationalism, trying to put out content which is unverified, which is at times conjecture, which definitely is sensational, in order to see as to how you can measure up higher on that TRP paradigm. And if I am not mistaken, that the incentives and some of the other financial prerequisites of people in the television industry are also linked to as to how the company really performs on the TRP barometer. So therefore, you have a fundamental structural flaw, which then allows deliberately and at times inadvertently a lot of content to slip through, primarily because the emphasis is not on sensitivity. The emphasis is not on nuanced treatment. The emphasis is on sensationalism and as to how that can generate TRPs, which generates more advertising revenues, which means healthier bottom lines and which means happier shareholders. So, and in order to correct this fundamental flaw, for the first time, the government has attempted to seize the bull by the horns, and we have put in place a regulatory framework as to how the television audience measurement in this country needs to be done. And if this initiative, with the support of all of you, actually sees the light of the day, because in private, every news broadcaster, every person who runs a free-to-air channel, almost every editor, without exception, has come and told me that, you know, this is an excellent initiative, but we can only say it in private. We will not be able to say that in public, but be that as it may, it doesn't change anything. But if we are able to see this through, you will find that in the months and the years to come, it will take some time, but in the months and years to come, you will find a far more sober discourse, maybe even a serious discourse in the media space, which would then take care of some of the insensitivity which all of you would have reflected upon during your deliberations. Coming to the new media, and of course on print media, on electronic media, see, there is another problem which has happened, and this is primarily because, as I said, that regulatory frameworks were not in place when the sector opened up. If content is king, distribution is God in the electronic media business. And distribution in most Indian states has been controlled either through surrogate political ownership, or it has been controlled by monopoly interests again. We initiated a consultation process through the TRAI. We've got their recommendations. The Interministerial Committee has accepted those recommendations, and we are in the process of issuing guidelines which will ensure that no single entity is able to have monopoly insofar as distribution of electronic content is concerned, which would create diversity and pluralism in the market space, which would ultimately give the consumer a choice. Coming to the new media, well, the new media is a different cup of tea altogether. And I personally feel that it has been the most audacious experiment with anarchy, and it has succeeded. The internet represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before in the history of mankind has so much power been available to so many people at so many different places concurrently. There is more digital content which is generated every 2 days than possibly from the dawn of civilization till about 2003. And so you have a very funny situation whereby there are two civilizations, a physical civilization which evolved over the millennia and a virtual civilization which is evolving. And they still need to find that balance where they can happily interact. I have been saying this repeatedly, that for all those who value the freedom of speech and expression, who believe that this freedom is intrinsic to the way they would like to live, they have a vested interest in ensuring that common agreed international rules of engagement emerge in the cyber world. Because if those accepted international rules of engagement do not emerge, I am afraid you will see the balkanization of the net. Like we saw the rise of the internet. Now I do not know actually who invented it, whether it originated in the Defense Advanced Applications Laboratory or Mr. Al Gore, as he claims, invented it. But the fact is that this global commons, which has become a part of our everyday existence, may not continue in its present form. And I think what the Chinese have been able to do in terms of firewalling the internet and almost making it an intranet, though their own Twitter, Weibo creates lots of problems for their government, but is possibly a precursor where, based upon common value systems or based upon the hegemony of power, you would find governments exceedingly tempted to tamper with the underlying hardware which controls the entire architecture of the internet as we know it. Now, the difficulty with the new media, and the reason why I talk about common agreed rules of engagement, is that it gives the license and liberty to everybody to be a broadcaster without any response or without any restraint or responsibility. There are no editorial controls which the content goes through. What you feel at a particular point in time, you put it out in the public space. At times it ends up having horrendous implications and consequences. Forget the personal abuse which all of us who operate in the public space are subjected to. That's a different matter altogether. But the larger national security implications, the larger implications in terms of minority rights, the larger implications in terms of gender sensitivity, I think are issues which nobody has attempted to go into. And any discussion on having agreed rules of engagement in the cyberspace, is rubbished and brushed aside in the name of a transgression into the right to freedom of speech and expression. I think while the right to freedom of speech and expression is important, it is equally important that we try and preserve the sanctity and the character of this global commons in the manner in which it has emerged over a period of time. And the reason why I flag the new media is because, I have a daughter who's 16 and a half years old. And she switched off Facebook and Twitter, voluntarily. So I asked her, I said that, what is it in the sense you've got bored? Is there something which interests you, which is even far more exciting than possibly the interaction which you have? And she'd been quite a robust new media user ever since she was 7 or 8 years old, if I recall correctly. And she told me, she says, some of the stuff is difficult to handle. And I see an increasing tendency, among age group, among her friends, people who are equally, if not enlightened, but at least aware of what goes on in the world, in terms of their ability as a generation to be able to deal with this information overload. And so therefore, if we are talking about gender sensitivity, somehow we will have to find a way, without impinging on the freedom of speech and expression, to be able to insert some filters which takes care of what I call the dark net, or the spectator of the hidden people, whereby rather than it becoming an instrument of networking, an instrument of happiness, an instrument of connecting people, it actually becomes the reverse of all this. And these aberrations, or correcting these aberrations in the media space, I think is fundamentally important to transforming the manner in which women are portrayed in the media, or the manner in which at times extremely insidious, subversive and a discourse even pertaining to women's rights or even pertaining to women's empowerment takes place on some of these platforms. And therefore, you see, coming to the Cinematographic Act, since Dr. Rajput had raised it, as to why did we really think about having a new Cinematographic Act? And the reason for that is very clear, because as I looked across the entire information and broadcasting space, I realized that we were trying to interact in a 21st century world with possibly 20th century, if not 19th century instrumentalities. And therefore, you had a Cinematographic Act which had been completely overtaken by the developments which had transformed the film industry or the creative industry completely. And thus you required a new paradigm to be able to come to grips with the situation as it has emerged. And I'm very happy that Justice Mukul Mudgal and his committee, which consisted of both creative people, and I deliberately put a couple of lawyers onto it, to sort of help them out with the drafting, have not only come out with a report, but have come out with a new cinematographic bill. And we didn't want to close the discussion out there. After they presented their report, I told our people, I said, please put it out on the website of the ministry so that there could be far-reaching consultations, or we could have as many inputs as possible, so that whenever the bill gets taken to cabinet and then to parliament, which I hope is sooner than later, you have a comprehensive legislation which can at least take care of the situation as it would emerge over the next 3 decades. And the one thing that we've tried to do with legislation which emanates out of information and broadcasting is to see that it comes with an expiry date, that it comes with a sunset clause, that after 30 years it would expire if it is not revalidated by Parliament, because then you have a situation whereby Parliament is compelled to revisit the legislation, and you do not have a situation whereby the Evidence Act dates back to 1862 and the Penal Code to 1890 and the Land Acquisition Act to 1885 and or whatever it is. So therefore I hope that we would be able to succeed on this. In terms of the Vishaka guidelines that you talked about, I cannot agree with you more, because there is a need to not only have grievance redressal mechanisms, but grievance redressal mechanisms which people are able to access and which they can be actioned. We've had an opportunity to deal with some of these issues in the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, both within the ministry and in our affiliated organizations. And I know as to how difficult it is at times in order to see that people have the right approach, people have the right level of sensitivity, and are able to address the question that women are equals and are not unequal in terms of the manner in which they are treated in the workspace. With regard to the silent violence which Dr. Rajput referred to, since the entire media space today is really private in that sense, is corporatized or it is in private hands in those terms, what I would like to recommend to you, Dr. Rajput and your committee, that rather than the government taking the initiative, I think this initiative should come from a high-level committee, especially where the private space outweighs the public space, by a measure of 10:1. That the consultation with regard to safety and security of women in the media workplace, with regard to the silent violence which you referred to, that consultation really needs to be led by the high-level committee, with the government, being a participant and of course an important stakeholder in the process. Having said that, we would await the recommendations of your consultation, and whatever is doable, we would try and see that we action that and try and make this country, this world, a better place to live in. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.